Welcome to the Future of Wellness, exploring self-transformation and holistic healing to unlock your inner potential. Hosted by Christabel Armston and Keith Parker.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Future of Wellness. Today we're joined by Diane Tegtmeier. Diane is a seasoned practitioner with a multifaceted background in biochemistry research, environmental activism, clinical social work, and energy healing. She has taught at the Social Work Graduate School at the University of Kansas and the Harbin School of Healing Arts, specializing in ethics, aquatic bodywork, and trauma healing. Diane has maintained a private practice since 1994, supporting individuals through trauma, chronic illness, and challenging life transitions. She is the author of Relationships That Heal, which offers a natural ethics model for health practitioners, and The Sacred Cell, published last year, which explores how principles of nature shape human relationships. Both books weave personal narratives with practical guidance and experiential exercises to help readers apply these insights in their own lives. Diane, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Your background spans so many different disciplines, from biochemistry, social work, environmental activism to energy healing. Looking back, do you think that there is something that glues all of these things together? What's your reflection on having such a rich and varied background?
Well, I'll add motherhood to that, which was a biggie. But also, I think this book gave me an opportunity to reflect on how all of those, in biochemistry, I was fascinated by the relationships among cells and among molecules and the wonder of that. And that's where I learned about the cell membrane way back in the 60s. And then as I evolved into environmental activism and saw how it's our relationships with each other, whether we're testifying before a congressional committee or we're marching in the street. I've always been a keen observer of the relationships, and that guided me into the social work profession, which had an ecological perspective on human behavior. So that just continued that sense of wonder of all the ways we relate to each other. And then when I got into energy healing, that whole thing just expanded my perception into other realms of consciousness with relationships. And so I celebrate the wonder that I've been privileged to observe, I guess, as I evolved through these different careers. And of course, motherhood, raising two children and watching those relationships develop among us, that was a laboratory of its own.
You mentioned there, Diane, being a keen observer of relationships, and many healers describe what we might call a personal initiation that solidifies their calling. I wonder if there was a defining experience in your journey that shaped your path in trauma healing and energy work in particular.
Yes, I was at a point in my marriage where my husband just was very angry and exploded one day and left on a business trip. And I walked into a sliding glass door and almost broke my nose. I didn't realize it was closed, and I whacked into it and landed on the floor just sobbing. And a really dear friend of mine showed up at the door at that moment. And he said, "Oh, a woman has just moved to Lawrence, Kansas. She does energy healing. You need to see her." And I was a biochemist. Everything had to be measured and, 5 senses, that's it. And she just awakened me to a whole other dimension of experience and relationship to a larger field of consciousness. So I'm forever grateful to her for that.
We speak to many people who wind up having backgrounds in the sciences, and then they have some kind of seminal experience that helps them to explore the other side of things. Let's say the subtle, the energetic, the consciousness based model of things. In that experience you're describing, what was it that was so compelling? I mean, you just said exposed you to different dimensions, but like what are the things that stand out to you in memory that was so compelling? What brought you to that other direction?
Immediately after receiving the first treatment from Ursula was her name, um, I noticed that I was not just looking at a flower, I was experiencing that flower in a very multidimensional way that I had not known before, except maybe when I was 3 or 4 years old and picking flowers in the prairie and seeing their wonder. But at that time, it seemed like my awareness of life and the relationships among all beings in life just started expanding. And then when she started teaching me how to do energy work, and I would uh, touch people as instructed by her, very light touch, very conscious touch. I didn't feel anything at first. But then the person I touched would say, "Wow, when you did this," and they would start sharing how their consciousness was expanded. They were contacting inner experiences that they didn't know were there. I had to, my scientific self said, "Oh, this is evidence. There's something happening here." And then, of course, over the years, I increased my perceptual skills so that when I touch someone now, I can feel things, but it's not always the same thing that they feel. And it's wonderful to, again, to see the interplay of consciousness when I touch another person.
We mentioned there in the bio, you recently published The Sacred Cell, What Nature Teaches Us About Relationships, where the deeper complexities of human relationships are explored through the principles of the cell membrane. Can you tell us what inspired you to write this book?
The first book that Keith mentioned, The Relationships That Heal, I was attending a course on aquatic body work, which is what I did for many years. And the instructor was talking about the importance of boundaries in the professional healing relationship. And as a social worker, I heard that over and over and over again. But through the years, I kept saying, boundaries just invite pushback and constrict consciousness. I had had enough, and I stormed out of the room in tears. And the woman, the teacher, the instructor asked me, what's up, Diane? What's happening? And I shared what I just, and she said, we're looking for somebody to teach an ethics course in our school here on bodywork training. Would you be willing to develop one? I said, "Oh, okay." And I went out into the forest and I walked, and I just got the insight that I should listen to how the cell membrane manages all relationships in living systems. And I had studied that 40 years previously in my cell physiology class, never really was interested in it. But then it seemed, so I looked into it and just was shown from within these 6 principles. So that book, that became a course, then a book. And I thought, oh, good, I'm done with writing. It's not my thing. And, 10 years later or more, I'm walking through the forest again, and the forest says, Now is the time to apply those cell membrane principles to all of our human relationships with our families, with our sexual partners, within our communities. Things are at a point in our evolution that we need to do this. Well, I didn't want to do that. I would rather hike in nature than write about it. And so but then I start, and the way things work, I know you both know this. When you're supposed to do something, things just start showing up. And it seemed like everywhere I looked, people were saying, I can't talk to my sister. My lover's doing this, and politics is this horrible. And I just thought, okay, Forrest, I'll do it. So that's what I did.
Before we do get into maybe the content, some of those principles from the sacred cell, maybe we could delve a little bit into practices that you had before that. Going into that, you mentioned that you were practicing Watsu at Harbin. Could you tell us just a little bit about Watsu and in terms of how that might inform the kind of relational dynamics? Because Watsu, of course, is in water. So we have the art of healing touch outside of water, and then we have it inside of water. And look, what is it that the water brings that's different? And is that in any way reflective or gives us the beginning of the lessons about the cell membrane communication?
Oh, Keith, you nailed it. Because it was in my practice of aquatic bodywork and Watsu that served as the laboratory for testing out these principles. Because it's water is a conductor of energy in a way that unlike anything else. And as your listeners may not know, it's a very intimate um, form of body work in that I literally hold a person in my arms in body temperature water, moving their body rhythmically, tracking the energy, and helping release places that are blocked. So every time when I was working on an issue about power dynamics, for example, something would show up in a session that I had to call upon those self principles and say, how do I respond in this situation? And then also, I mean, just look at it. It's like everything in nature repeats itself on every dimension. And so here we have two bodies in a field of water. The information carried in that water is touching the receptors that we carry all around our body. So it's a much more potent field for doing this work, and therefore the relationship that you form with your partner is calls calls upon a deeper awareness of relationship skills than if you're just talking on a Zoom call.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, Diane, before we move on, because it feels like such a key piece. What is it you're noticing as practitioner that's different, say, to touch-based therapy on a massage table? You mentioned the water's a medium. Are you experiencing the sensations, the information more clearly, more strongly? What would you say is happening in the dynamic between you as practitioner and client in the water space?
You probably know about HeartMath, the HeartMath Institute. Well, the energy field of the heart extends out. I can't remember what the distance is, but when you're in the water and holding someone, their head is resting on your elbow or on your shoulder, and you're holding them in their arms like a baby. And they're being held in your heart field. And what's in your heart field will be transmitted to that person in your arms. And likewise, whatever's going on in the inner world of your healing partner will be more readily perceived by me than when they're on a table. So it demands more of the practitioner to stay. One of the main principles of the cell membrane is to be centered in your response in a relationship. It's so essential that you stay centered in your heart and in compassion. But if I felt, for example, threatened by this person in some way, I would have to, while moving this person in the water, I would have to take myself through a process of bringing myself to center so that I could respond in a healing way to him or her. The same, I'm having a memory now of a woman who was going through a severe childhood trauma, and how palpable that was for me. And the fact that she was in warm water and submersed in warm water, that helped evoke that memory for her. But by being held by someone who is capable of compassion and tracking that energy, and helping her release it, the healing was just amazing to witness of what happened with her. It just magnifies all the elements of a relationship. And yeah, it was quite the laboratory.
Might we briefly maybe touch into what the six principles are, and then maybe we can explore from there? Or what do you think about that for a presentation on the core principles?
Yeah. The first principle is oneness. And there are many, I'm just noticing how many people are writing about that right now, taking us beyond the level of consciousness that sees us as separate from each other, separate from other living systems, that and things are mine and yours. Um, the cell membrane is an open system, and it's connected with every other cell on the planet in relationship. So that to me is such a foundational principle, because a cell functions within a field of oneness and interconnection. And while so many people are writing about that right now, that we are at an evolutionary point where we need to move beyond a sense of separateness, dominance, control. The cell has been functioning that way from the beginning of evolution of life on the planet. If we're aware that we are in a field of oneness, and that everything we say, think, feel, or do has an effect on everything else, that has a profound shift in our relationship, how we function. In this field of oneness, it's not this boring mass where everything is the same. We've evolved into all of these differentiated organisms, each with our own purpose, our own qualities, and in fact, that differentiation is in itself the impulse for evolution. And then the third principle is selective permeability. Now, in contrast to a boundary where you say, this is where I stop. Don't come here. Don't say this. I won't talk about that. A cell will select those messages, those molecules from its environment that serve its purpose. And it lets all the other messages go on to the other cells who might need it. It takes what it needs. It's also very conscious about what it puts into the field around itself. Okay, I'm a pancreas cell and I'm supposed to make insulin. So I'm going to put that out into the field and I'm going to take into my cell just those just those chemicals that I need to do that job. And so selective permeability to me is a key principle that differentiates it from a boundary, in that if we know, I mean, the three of us are talking here and we're touching each other's receptors, when we're triggering each other's thoughts and feelings. We do this all day, every day, even in our dream world. And throughout our life, we develop receptors that are specific to our experience. And when we're triggered, it gives us an opportunity to evolve and differentiate. So it's part of the whole evolutionary impulse. And then containment. All these cellular organelles are not just flying around, floating in free space. They're contained by the membrane. The membrane contains the cell so that it can perform its unique purpose. And so we, sitting here, we each have our own container. We have our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own receptor field. And in any relationship, it's really helpful to support the containment of the other person, so that we can become aware of who and what they are, and what it is we're experiencing in a relationship. For example, if you say something that is uncomfortable for me, rather than, the containment principle says, Diane, feel that. What did that feel like to you? And it asks me to come to my center, which is the next principle, my core, my inner guide, my code, just like the nucleus of a cell determines how that cell will function. We each have our own inner core too, and it guides us. Some will call it our soul's code. So if you say something that triggers me in an unpleasant way, rather than saying, oh, you did this, and then I counter it with something back to you, it said, oh, wow, that made me uncomfortable. I really feel uncomfortable hearing that. I'm honoring my own container and what my own experience of this relationship is. And in a dialogue, I'm going to try to help you know where you are. Rather than attacking where you are, I'm going to help you know where you are by reflecting back, by asking more questions. So containment is very, very important when the receptors from selective permeability get triggered. It gives us more consciousness about how we want to respond, rather than just saying, "Oh, you crossed my boundary, goodbye." That doesn't foster evolution in the relationship. And then the sixth principle is relationship field. Every relationship creates its own energetic field around it. If you walk into someone's home and two little kids are fighting on the floor, you get a sense of what their relationship feels like. When you're with somebody, another couple, and you feel the compassion and the caring between them. That you don't have to hear anything, you sense the field. So everything that all of the energetic messages within a particular relationship are shared in the field. And, you call your work field dynamics, we're in it. And those relationship fields are embedded like the old Russian babushka dolls. They're embedded within the relationship between siblings is within the family's within the community within this the state, etc. And we're all held in this, and it brings us back to oneness in this larger cosmic field. So those are the principles, and in the sacred cell, I apply those principles to our relationships with family. And I take it into a expanded understanding of sexuality in nature, and then how we can apply them in our community relationships.
A brief pause to thank you for listening to this episode. If you're looking to take the next step in your transformation, find out how we can support you with our popular energy healing training, one-to-one private sessions, free resources, and more. Visit energyfielddynamics.com to learn more.
Thank you, Diane, for sharing that summary. It was very evocative just to tune in and hear you speak of the cells in this way. I'm particularly interested in what you shared around this idea of selective permeability. I really like the way it can connect us to a sense of responsibility, our own responsibility around what it is we're putting out, what a cell, as you were saying, what an individual is putting out into the field, as well as what we're choosing to project, if that's not too strong a word. Because I can really connect to what you're sharing around this idea of boundaries, which is a very modern and popular term, and I think something that's quite misunderstood in many ways. And the very organic nature in which you're describing this selective permeability just allows such an increased sense of spaciousness around this idea of connecting with other with healthy boundary, to use the word, and also how individuals can take responsibility for what is happening, as you say, regardless, all day, every day anyway, the stimulation of receptors, right? The stimulation of each other's thoughts, emotions, feelings, experience. Just bringing awareness to that.
Yeah, your word spaciousness, that really captured a lot, I think, where boundary confines, selective permeability invites us into a more spacious awareness. Yeah, while still protecting, doing the kind of protection that we sometimes need, that boundaries provide, but it's still, it allows for relationship development rather than limitation.
I wonder if I could just expand on that briefly, Diane, and ask you if somebody's listening to this and they say, or their narrative to themselves is, I struggle with boundaries, right? I struggle with enforcing, managing, maintaining my boundaries. How is it that you would bring this concept to them as a way of assisting with that belief?
I would invite them to meet with their awareness where that struggle brings them. Because if they're struggling with boundaries, it means what I'm hearing, if it's correct, that they have a hard time setting boundaries and maintaining them. And so I would inquire further about what happens when you set a boundary. And I could guarantee more often than not, because they have a hard time acknowledging their own agency in setting a boundary, like I'm afraid to do this. So that brings them an opportunity to be aware on that limitation in their agency. And the centering principle would ask them to go inside, feel that difficulty in setting the boundary. And then what happens when you do? Oh, well, she just pushes against it and pushes against it until I finally either cave in or I get upset or whatever. okay, this is yet another opportunity to sit and meet and be conscious of what it is gets awakened in you around the issue that the boundary brings forward.
You said that these principles also led you to look into sexuality and to look at sexuality through like an evolutionary lens of this model. Could you describe more about that? How does this lead us to insights about or a different way of looking at sexuality?
Well, I don't think it was just the principles alone, but as I was exploring how the principles apply to sexuality, for example, oneness and um, centering, all the words around sexuality of this is mine, you're mine forever. Um, all of these boundaries that come into sexual relationships, whether we're talking to our teenage children about what's happening in their bodies, to old folks wondering what's happening now in my body. Um, it's not about control, and there was something in me that knew that we're limiting our understanding of sexuality to the reproductive genital band of the spectrum of sexuality, and where we needed to control and dominate. And then I met Barbara Marx Hubbard. She was a pioneer in consciousness, in evolutionary consciousness, and Elizabeth Sahtouris, who wrote an evolutionary biology book in which she expanded my understanding of the role of sex in nature. And in nature, sexual activity, which is the exchange of genetic information and recombination of genetic information, arose when the primitive bacteria created so much oxygen in their environment that they began to poison themselves. And another organism evolved that knew how to use oxygen for food. And so these two organisms got together and they created a new bacteria that solved the problem created by life itself. Now think about that. Sex evolved to solve a problem created by life itself. And if you read further, like Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book Gathering Moss, she talks about how mosses only reproduce sexually when there's a problem to be addressed, when something new needs to evolve, needs to happen. So back to Barbara Marx Hubbard, she said, and I don't have the page, I'll paraphrase her. She said that nature put joy into procreation, and now nature is putting joy into co-creation. So in life reproduced on Earth for a couple of billion years before sex was used for reproduction. And the same organisms were just reproducing and everything was fine until we needed a change. So in meiosis, which is the process by which sex cells are formed, the male and female cells reproduce themselves exactly as they are. They kind of affirm, this is who I am. And then they divide. And each one gives up half of its genetic information to recombine and create a totally new organism that has never existed before. Okay, so it requires a co-creative energy. And Barbara, when she said this, it just rang a bell in me. And I said, this is a whole new way of looking at sex. And in my experience as a practitioner at Harbin Hot Springs, which is a clothing optional retreat center where sexual energy is flowing everywhere, it gave me an opportunity to look at the full spectrum of sexuality, that it's about so much more than just getting it on, and that nature has much more conscious and selective um, parameters around what gets created. Sexuality is nature's creative energy and how it gets used. So now we're in a lot of crises on this planet right now. And we could use, rather than reproducing the same old ideas over and over again and trying to convince others that our way of doing it is the right way, how can we come together in and create whole new solutions that haven't been thought of before? So that's what Barbara Marx Hubbard calls suprasexual. That nature is putting joy into suprasexual behavior beyond just the reproduction, romantic aspects of sexuality. And that can lead us into all different kinds of relationships that are not what many of us were raised to believe was the epitome of a relationship.
Speaking of relationships, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Diane, on how these principles are showing up in families and intergenerational family patterns. There's a big movement these days towards understanding epigenetics. There's lots of different modalities to help us deal with intergenerational family trauma. We have everything from family constellations through to different parts systems. How is it that what you've studied here, how does it show up? How does it demonstrate or evolve through intergenerational family work and patterns?
Oh, thank you, Christabel, because that's been one of my primary motivations. As a social worker, I studied family systems therapy and learned about intergenerational patterns, and it helped me understand my response to the various challenges I faced in my family relationships, the stories of which I share in the book as illustrations of these things. But I mean, just to give you a little example, my maternal grandmother emigrated to this country. No, first thing, when she was 6 years old, her mother died, leaving her and her dad with three younger brothers. So she became a mother at 6 years old and lost a lot. She emigrated to this country and she, one of her children died. And my grandfather was told by his by his doctor, get her pregnant. This is the way to heal trauma in the 1920s. And my mother was the result of that conception. And when my mother was just 18 months old, her father died suddenly. So grief and the need to take care of your family, unresolved grief and the need to take care of your family is what what came to me. And as I faced challenges with raising my children and other things, I I was so grateful for this intergenerational perspective that enabled me to um, to work through these challenges. And the cell membrane principles, as I began to work with them, I could see how they were functioning in my family relationship field. My family relationship field was filled with unconscious energy around loss and grief and the sense of responsibility to be there, to take care of everybody. Um, and so I had an opportunity, the second principle, differentiate. I had an opportunity to differentiate that um, energy in my family field by meeting that in myself, transforming it so it's not floating around in the field that I now share with my children and my grandchildren. So we can, every time we work to differentiate, come to a new center, work with those activated receptors through selective permeability, come to center, transform, we're affecting the whole relationship field. And now, as we're working, I know you probably know the work of Thomas Hubel um, on collective trauma. I'm finding that in my work with my clients now, as we meet and work with the trauma that they experience, it always leads to something in the intergenerational family pattern and that we're holding collectively as a culture. So the cell really, as we look at it and honor it, it really does show us how we can evolve from here, from all these crises and into new ways of being with each other.
How is it that you currently work with people? What's your practice look like when a person contacts you to do treatments or sessions?
Well, sadly, I no longer have warm natural springs water to work in, and um, and COVID uh, even took me away from more personal touch, and I learned quite miraculously that energy knows no boundaries, and I'm doing a lot of my work now on Zoom, both with both with circles, healing circles, in which each person brings some issue that's in the foreground for them, either personally or in their relationship field somewhere. And as we come together, we're so amazed, really amazed at how when two or more gather, uh, healing happens. And we come together, we go into a meditative field, and rather than trying to create a boundary between us and what's hurting, whether it's collective or individual, we hold those wounds, those shadows, we hold them in the field of the circle. And as we do that without any intention of doing anything to it, just the right frequencies of light and information come to us, and we're seeing transformation in beautiful ways. Even with people who are not in the circle, someone brings a student of theirs who's struggling, and they're not physically present on the call, but they allow themselves to be brought in, and things start happening. So compared to when I first started putting my hands on people in 1990, and what we're seeing now, um, we're in a really amazing time for healing. And so I do that individually and in circles. And we just moved to Lawrence, Kansas from living in Oregon and Harbin before that. And so um, I'm slowly beginning to work with groups and in person here with Circle. I have a relationship circle based on the sacred self, and I also offer this to people who, if two or three people want to get together and work with me on Zoom, that's I'm open for that. I'm finding that it's becoming very helpful work.
You're speaking here of your work as a practitioner, Diane, and Relationships That Heal, your first book, presented natural ethics model for practitioners. With all the changes, as you've noted a few there yourselves, in today's wellness landscape, what do you see as being some of the most urgent ethical conversations or dilemmas that we need to be thinking about in today's wellness landscape?
In ethics, professional ethics, a shift that it needs to be made between the power dynamics between the therapist and the client or the doctor and the patient. In that first book, I define healing as a process, not something that is done to someone. And it results from the partnership that is for a healing partnership that is formed. So I find I can do absolutely nothing to help a person who isn't available to participate fully in the process. I can touch them, I can use all the skills I know, nothing happens. But when we come together in a partnership, and I think that's where the whole redefinition. I had a therapist in my 30s who she was wonderful, but she was very strict on boundaries. And when I met her, like in the grocery store in our neighborhood or something, it was like, oh, I can't have this kind of relationship with you. I can say hello and all of that, but nothing else. I think that the cells are teaching us that all cells are related to all other cells, and we have to be selective in what we take in. I mean, I'm not going to pour out my heart to this woman at the grocery stand, but we can talk about how lovely a day it is, and we could be together. That's selectively permeability rather than a boundary that says, I can't talk to you outside the office.
If we zoom out, you mentioned that you feel as though we need new solutions to these bigger problems as well. Just not just at the level of ethics and healing facilitation, but at a collective level and broader kinds of considerations about the different challenges we face on a much broader scale. Do you have a particular solution or problem you'd want to focus in on for a moment that you see most kind of critical or relevant in your work or your life?
Well, I think what comes up, of course, is the political polarization that where people are just so strongly in one camp or strongly in another, and nobody's talking, and it's creating this incredible dynamic of destruction. And whether I had experience in this when I was an environmental activist here in Kansas, 50 years ago. And I did it all wrong back then because I felt like I needed to prove that what I was saying about renewable energy was the right thing and what the utilities were saying was the wrong thing. And we never talked to each other. We never found we didn't we weren't supra-sexual in that we didn't find what I can let go of and you can let go of, and how can we co-create a solution to meeting the energy needs of the people in Kansas in an environmentally sustainable way. And as it turned out, we didn't do that, and we lost, they won, so sort of. But what ended up happening is the utilities went broke, as we predicted they would by following the path that they did. And they are now investing. Kansas is one of the leading states in renewable energy, which is what we were proposing back in the 70s. So, I wish we had done it differently. And of course, now I have family members with very different views. And, a friend just yesterday, how can I talk to this person I need to work with who she keeps accusing me of voting the wrong way? And so we worked through, we said, how can we take the principles and apply them to that situation? And, she got somewhere. We'll see how it works. She hasn't encountered the person yet, but, this is evolution. It takes time.
Appreciate that message there around the usefulness in moving away from polarization, where both parties remain stuck effectively. The name of the podcast is The Future of Wellness, and sometimes we like to invite guests to describe or share what the future of wellness might look like for them in an ideal world or otherwise.
Oh, Christabel, I can feel it. I can, and I know you can too. We know where we're going, and that it may get rough on the road there, but I really feel the reality of coming into co-creative problem solving, a community system, a governance system where we honor oneness and we know that we're all a part, nobody's separate from this, and that we can honor the unique, different qualities of each person, just like the forest and the fungi and the forbs, they all relate to each other. Nobody's trying to destroy anybody else. Even the predators know that they have to hunt in balance, and that hunting helps preserve the ecosystem. So I know we can feel in our inner code, in our center, we can feel where we're going. Like Arkan Lishwala, who is an indigenous person from Peru who I've studied, he said it's time now that we allow ourselves to be guided from our heart. Too much thinking. Let us learn to connect to our heart. And I feel it among the three of us now. We know where we're going. And let that guide our next step. And fortunately, and there are a lot of people writing now about this, about oneness, about integration, about as moving beyond separateness. But what I love about what came through me in this book is that these principles give us tools to use to do that. And it goes beyond just thinking, isn't this a nice idea? But how can we practice it? And this book gives exercises at the back where you can practice it. And so let's hope. And trust. It's not hope, it's trust. I trust it's happening.
If people want to find your work or this book, where should we direct them?
To lulu.com, lulu.com, and they can order it directly from there. Or they can, if they want a signed copy from me, they can go to my to my email and just ask me for one. DianeTeg@gmail.com.
We really appreciate you sharing your wisdom today, and the work that you've done. Everything seemed to have come full circle with these different subjects, and I just appreciate the connection and your time.
It's been a delight to just visit with both of you. It helped me forget I was talking to anybody but just the two of you. Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks for being a part of the Future of Wellness. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps us reach more people and to make great episodes like this one. Learn more about field dynamics and why we think the future of wellness matters. Check us out at energyfielddynamics.com. See you next time.